So Miles Morales is fighting Black Panther, and it's amazing. This story is so phenomenal. So we are back with Webs of Wakanda, and as a little bit of a catch-up here, Miles is infected with vampirism, and where he was taken to Wakanda by Black Panther for the purpose of seeing if BAST could cure Miles of his vampirism, we end up finding out that because Miles is bitten by a radioactive spider, that makes him a herald of Anansi, the patron god of all the spider people in the multiverse. Bast initially rejected this, and she was pissed off about it. But instead of just allowing them to be destroyed for just walking in and offending Bast by asking for her favor while being represented by another god, instead, Anansi and Bast kind of watch on as Black Panther and Miles fight each other. But this fight is not what it seems, because what initially goes on here is Miles doesn't want to fight T'Challa. And there's a couple reasons for this, right? The first one is because of the fact that the two of them are friends, and T'Challa's here to help Miles. And the second is because Miles doesn't really seem confident in the fact that he can beat T'Challa. And there's good reason for that, right? T'Challa is an incredibly capable fighter. He's one of the three smartest people in the world. And while you and I may look at that as just kind of like a guy who is intellectually capable, there's also all the knowledge of fighting styles that come with it, right? An exceedingly well-rounded intelligence. So fighting Black Panther is no small thing, despite the various abilities that Miles has. And that's why when the fight initially unfolds, all Miles does is bob and weave. He jumps out of the way, even given the prodigious abilities of Black Panther. Now, reading between the lines here, this is incredibly fascinating because what it shows is that even if Miles doesn't have the ability to physically overcome Black Panther, he does have the ability to avoid him. And when you compare that with Black Panther's incredible speed and agility, it's no small thing. Truthfully, over the years, there's always been this idea that the only thing that differentiates spider people from villains that would have otherwise destroyed them is their spider sense. But in the case of Miles, his spider sense not working here. So this is just good old-fashioned reaction time. And in fact, we're told as much that when Black Panther appears behind him, Anansi says, he's behind you. And Miles says, like, my spider sense didn't even pick up the fact that he was there. And that's where Anansi says, you're in the domain of the voodoo, my champion. How can you sense what you don't understand? So it's really fascinating, right? This is just good old-fashioned agility and Miles bobbing and weaving and putting up a pretty solid fight. Now, he does go to rear his punch back and hit Black Panther, and that should be more than enough to take out most anybody. But as we know, Black Panther's got a vibranium suit. So it just absorbs the impact of that hit. And that's where Miles really starts to get a little frustrated here, but then kind of starts asking the question, like, what's going on in all of this, right? Like, how does any of this have to do with me being cured of my vampirism? What's the point of this? Now, it is one of the things that Black Panther warned him about. The gods are a little enigmatic and a little mysterious and frustrating at times. Their motivations are not always clear. And truth to tell, there doesn't seem to be any grandiose reason for any of this outside of the fact that it just brings interest to Anansi. He's just kind of toying with Miles and having fun. But there will be a hint at the end of this that it is actually part of a much bigger plan. We just don't really know what it is yet because Cody Ziegler hasn't told us. But Anansi does show up and offer Miles some words of encouragement and a little bit of guidance here, where Miles is frustrated because his hits aren't working. Bast tells him in the realm between time and space, between the physical and the immaterial, why would a punch have any more effect than a breeze? I.e., do you think that's air you're breathing now? But that's when Anansi chimes in, right? And he says, this is a spiritual fight, a contest of souls. Fists alone will not save you, young spider. I will show you. I will give you the push to become my great champion of story and song. Join my chorus and sing proud, my champion. And that's when Miles is ensnared with the magical abilities of Anansi. And in turn, he's confronted by all these villains of his own past, because that's where the test of soul comes in, right? He's confronted by the Assessor, he's confronted by Venom, and he's confronted by Raneem. Now, each of these villains represents a very important aspect of Miles Morales' life in varying ways. Venom represents the unfairness of death, and it represents the unfairness of loss, because Venom's significance in the life of Miles came with the death of his mother. In the original Ultimate Universe run, when Miles was first introduced, he came face to face with Venom. And in the fight with Venom, his mother was killed. So that was kind of the story of recklessness. With Raneem, it's the unfairness of life, the idea that there are circumstances beyond our control. Some of us win and some of us lose. In the case of Raneem, she was a girl who was supposed to attend the Visions Academy, and Miles Morales won her spot in the lottery system, or at least from her perspective, he won her spot. As far as he was concerned, he won it fair and square. But it's the unfairness of it all. When he was confronted with that reality, it was how harsh life can be and the guilt that he carries with it. Why should I succeed at the expense of somebody else? Why can't life be more fair in that way? In the case of the Assessor, it is the unfairness of overwhelming and oppressive power, because the Assessor was a character who was introduced and actually kidnapped Miles Morales and put him through a whole bunch of these really intense, kind of pointless and painful tests as far as Miles was concerned. Ultimately, Miles was rescued by Tony Stark, but Miles couldn't escape. There was nothing he could do. This incredible sense of powerlessness, and each one of these are aspects of Miles that he carries around in some form or fashion. These physical manifestations are just the most recognizable way in which Miles can be confronted with these things, because they are the most tangible representations of these things he's experienced in his life. But all of us have experienced that in some capacity, the feeling of helplessness, the feeling of being kind of put over by some overwhelming force that we cannot get past, the unfairness of life. And so with Miles coming face to face with all of these things, his initial inclination is to run, fight or flight. And that's a reflection of Miles at this point in his life. He's growing, he's learning to understand himself. You cannot run away from the unfairness of life. You have to figure out a way to make life work for you. You cannot get past the unfairness of overwhelming power, because there will always be people in the world, for whatever reason, that have some measure of power over you. Parents, employers, whatever the case happens to be. But it doesn't mean that life has to suck. And there's ways to get past that unfairness. We grow out of our homes, we leave our parents' purview. We don't like our employer, we can seek out better options or build our own source of employment and become self-employed. The list goes on and on and on. And so in the same way that you and I embark on our own individual journeys to overcome those individual struggles, Miles is doing the same thing, because while he believes that all of this is in his head, and Anansi is the one that's making all of this happen, Anansi is just kind of like, I mean, yes, I'm creating these physical manifestations, but where do you think they're coming from? Who do you think that I'm pulling them from? And that's when Miles really begins to put it all together. And he's presented with this almost impassable situation, right? Where the question is kind of asked here, because Black Panther is currently possessed by Varney, the demonic vampiric entity that initially possessed Blade during Blood Hunt and forced Blade to bite Miles Morales, Varney says, why resist, child? Why spurn the honor that is being Varney's vessel? This body is so very lacking. And where Miles responds in saying one voice in his head is enough, Varney counters and says, so this is the honor of a Spider-Man. Your fear means that I must reside in T'Challa's body? And so to clarify things, Anansi tells Miles what's going on, because Varney says your own cowardice would condemn this man to an eternity of servitude. And that's where Anansi says, it seems we are at a crossroads, my champion. How the story ends is up to you. And Miles is just kind of like, well, I mean, what do I do here, right? I can't let Varney have T'Challa. He just tried to help me, and I can't leave him out to dry. I'll fight. It's the only way. And that's where Anansi offers another bit of aid. And he says, is it though? Is it possible, O herald of mine, that violence will finally solve the problem where it could not solve the problem before? You're living the definition of insanity. Punches didn't work before. Why would they suddenly work now? And that's where Miles says, I understand, right? I finally get what it is that you are telling me. And so that's where Anansi asks, what will you do, great champion? Varney's sickness is rather relentless, it appears. Perhaps it's best to leave it tethered to the Black Panther. And the response of Miles, if the cost of me being cured is that T'Challa must become infected again, then I'll have to learn how to live with my own vampirism. And Anansi asks, so you refuse, right? You refuse to fight. That's what you're saying. I need a champion, a hero, not a cur. And the response of Miles, it's my burden, my responsibility. Just like I didn't ask to be bitten by that spider, I did not ask to be bitten by Blade, but I was anyway. I figured out the spider thing. I can figure out this vampire thing. And that's what Anansi was looking for, because it is a brave person that will stand in the face of overwhelming odds and challenge themselves first before they will challenge the person next to them. All too often, people are inclined to kind of look around their situation and to say, well, it's anybody's fault but mine. But in this instance, Miles is sitting down and looking at this situation and saying, okay, it's not my fault that I was bitten by Blade. I didn't ask for that, but it is a burden that has been thrown on me. So either I shuffle this burden off to somebody else and make it somebody else's problem, or I come to terms with it. And that was the true hero's choice, because as soon as Varney bites Spider-Man, that's when the ruse and the plan of Anansi comes to fruition. That's what he was waiting for. In order for the vampirism to truly be cured, Varney has to be defeated and locked away. Miles doesn't have the power to do that on his own. He's not capable of that. But Anansi is. He's vastly more powerful than Varney, but Varney needs a host. And in turn, Anansi had to exorcise him from that host, specifically a spider host. And that's why he says, your purpose has been served, demon. The lesson learned. Let the great Kwaku Anansi exorcise you of this burden of occupation. And Varney is sent away. And that's where Miles comes to terms with everything. But BAST has parting words of wisdom, because BAST says, your trial has been passed, child, but nothing in this life or the next comes without a price. I hope you know well the cost you have paid for Anansi's curse, little spider. Now, here's the kicker behind this. It's not the first time that BAST has said something like this. If you guys recall, in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, towards the end of it, after Black Panther had lost his powers and given his role up to his sister Shuri, following the events of Doom War, he was left powerless. He took Reed Richards as a witness to his own character and went to visit BAST. And BAST said, I will make you the king of the dead. I will give you a new role and I will give you new power. But know that with this role and power comes a price, and you will be forced to watch on as everything you know and love comes crashing down around you. She was warning him about the incursions, the collapse of the multiverse, which had long since been underway by the time Hickman's Fantastic Four run had come to a close, if we're talking about the effect of it all on a universal level and past and present and so on and so forth. But that's what she's warning Miles of here. You have come into a bargain with a spider god. It was one thing when you were bitten by a radioactive spider and thrown into this world that you didn't really fully understand, right? You were just part and parcel to it. And Anansi was fine to let you be. But now you've drawn his explicit attention and you've made a secondary pact. So that bill will come due. It's only a matter of time. But that's where Anansi steps in and tries to kind of swage, this whole situation, with his sweetened words and whatnot. And he says, sweet sister BAST, forgive my curtness, but my herald is no longer yours to lecture. I fear he and your Panther have had their fill of lessons today. And ultimately, Miles is moved away. He just kind of returns back to Wakanda with Black Panther. But the cool thing about this, right, when that happens, Anansi appears to him in this really, really interesting moment. And this is where I say there seems to be a bigger plan of what's going on, specifically for Miles, that will make him unique and stand apart from every other spider person across the multiverse. Because Anansi appears to him, right, in this moment when everything is kind of frozen. Literally, Anansi just seems to stop time, or maybe is just having a conversation with Miles in his head. But he says, did you really leave without saying goodbye? And the response of Miles is, well, I thought we were done. And Anansi says, why would that be, little spider? Something occurred to me during your trial, a most intriguing thought. Why should my sweet sister be the only one with champions? Two at that. No, Anansi will no longer watch his stories from afar. Oh, how exciting it will be to be in the thick of it all again. Yes, that would make for a great story indeed. Perhaps the great weaver will see his stories spun in real time. So for some reason, Anansi is now taking a personal role in Miles' life, but we don't know how far stretching this is. Anansi is the god of all spider people. Peter Parker, Kane, Ben Reilly, Spider-Gwen, the whole 9 yards. Anybody who's ever been bitten by a radioactive spider is under his influence and even his control. This situation could have transpired with any of those other characters. So it's entirely possible that Anansi's plan will involve every spider person across the cosmos. Fingers crossed it's not yet another Spider-Verse event, but we'll find out as time goes on, because Anansi appears to Miles as he falls asleep on the way back to New York, having been cured of his vampirism, and he says, "Sleep well, little spider, for our story has just begun." With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I loved it. I love Cody Ziegler's run on Miles Morales Spider-Man. It's incredible. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.